Okay, we're going to read a book called The Wump World. Now, this is a make-believe story. It's a fiction story. But a lot of the things that happen in this story could be things that could happen to our planet in real life. Right, so the author and the illustrator is the same person. His name is Peet. And look at those cute little animals. What do you think they are?
Goats.
They're not goats. This book is called The Wump World. So what do you think they are?
They're wumps.
They're wumps, right.
What are wumps?
You'll learn. The Wump World. The Wump World was a small world, very much smaller than our world. So it's not like Earth, it's even smaller. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump World was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. So they have a whole world to themselves. A whole little Wump world all to themselves. The Wumps were simple grass eaters. So do they eat all kinds of fancy stuff?
No.
They eat grass, and that's it. And they spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows.
They eat grass because they're the only ones on it.
In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear rivers and lakes. And at night, they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees. These are called bumbershoot trees, to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased, with nothing whatever to worry about. So they didn't have anything to worry about. They had water, they had grass, they had air, they had a place to sleep. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone a million miles away was watching their little world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. Are they monsters?
No.
What do you think they are?
They're cameras.
They're not cameras.
They're planes.
They're like planes or ships, right. I don't think they crashed. I think they're... Look. What did they do?
They're going to explore the Wump World.
I think they're going to explore the Wump World, and you know what? They landed. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, doors flew open. Then ramps shot to the ground. And down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. So out of the ships and down out of the ramps came all these creatures. They're not people. They're called the pollutions. They're the pollutions from the planet Pollutus. You know what pollute means? To make dirty or litter. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. So they ruined their other planet. And now they're coming to the Wump World. Let's see what happens. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution and world chief, across the meadow. At the top of a hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally, he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things going." So sometimes when leaders put a flag on land, they're taking ownership of it, whether it's theirs or not. So guess what he just did?
He took over the land.
He just took over the land.
And then he
One shrill trumpet blast brought the giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out onto the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. So they see these big machines coming out, and they're like, oh, no. Wump, wump, they cried. And in a wild-eyed panic, they went humpity-clumping off through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. So there they go. Then down they tumbled, head over heels through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high up above. Do they look happy?
No.
How do you think they're feeling?
Sad.
They're feeling sad, and I think they're feeling a little scared too, don't you?
But there's no grass.
Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. See what they're doing? They're working really fast, and they're pulling up the trees, and they're like shredding them. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump world was overrun. Look at what they did to the beautiful countryside. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world.
Look at that. Whoa. Look at that big tower. It looks really good.
It is a nice tower, but did they really need that big tower, do you think?
No.
Suddenly, great cities sprang up. Huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall, tall office buildings. And above them all loomed the 100-story skyscrapers.
When they get out, they're gonna not be surprised.
Well, is there any green there? Do you see any plants,
No, it's just dirt.
flowers, trees?
No dirt.
They've made it into a city, haven't they? Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes, rushing pell-mell in every direction. So that's how cities are. If you've ever heard of rush hour, that's when people are coming to or going back from work and the traffic is terrible. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and the mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to go spend the rest of their lives down there. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screechings coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. Yes.
The ones who takes over there, we don't even know who's need grass.
They might not know that. The Wumps did get scared and run away, didn't they? There was more and more noise and more of everything. Look at the water, the clean water. Look what's happened to it.
They are polluting it.
They're polluting it.
Right.
More buildings with more smokestacks, puffing more and more smoke. More freeways with more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust. More trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes.
They make fast food.
Pretty soon, the cities were so clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways. The pollutions could barely breathe. Did they have clean air anymore? No.
What they did to it.
Right. They went on sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in.
Oh, it's all their fault.
Is it one person's fault?
No,
Or one
it's all
pollution's
their
fault?
All
What if each one of them tried a little harder to make a difference? Do you think they could?
Yes.
Absolutely they could. But just like they can make a difference, can they also make it bad? Yes, if they're all making bad choices, it's not going to be very good for the Wump world, right? Yes, sir.
The Wumps could have stopped them.
You really think the Wumps could stop them?
No.
How would the Wumps be able to stop them?
They would have to fight them.
Do you think the Wumps would fight, though? They're very kind.
No.
No, I don't think they would.
They would just ignore them.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
They was annoying them until they messed up.
One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the world chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once. We can't breathe the air. We can't drink the water, and we can't stand the noise. We've had enough. Gertrude, sneezed the chief. I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once, I promise. So they've made the whole planet polluted and dirty and yucky.
They're not going to clean it up.
And what are they asking him to do?
Leave with not.
Well, they're like, do something. This is bad. We're not going to do this. With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with 3 top outer spacemen. Gentlemen, he said, this world of ours has gone sour. We need to get out of here quick. But first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men, so get going.
No, because then if they give him the rocket ship, he's going to go and destroy that world.
Well, I think that's what he's sending them out to do, isn't he? He's sending them out to go find other places. Right-o, Chief, barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then zaroosh, 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 the men took off in 3 directions. And in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour.
What?
It's pretty fast. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. That means he got really mad. Blast it all, he bellowed. What's keeping those blithering bubble heads? Then one morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, I've done it! I've done it! I found a new world, a bigger and better world! Was there anything wrong with the Wump world when they got there?
No, they messed it up.
They messed it up. And now what are they wanting?
A new world.
Another new world. And I
They're
think
not going to clean up the mess that they made.
they're not.
The Wumps will get sick and they'll die.
Nice going, lad, cried the world chief. And the crowd, boys and girls, listen. We'll talk at the end. Listen. Nice going, lad, cried the world chief. And the crowd gathered at the spaceport gave their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. So they're like, yay! But they can't breathe good, so they're like, In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. So they've came and they've just trashed the Wump world, and now they're leaving. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the space center and crowded about the giant spaceship. Hey, can we have just like 2 minutes? Awesome, thank you. After double checking to make sure all pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blast off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships shot off the ground, kazoom, up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump world. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with their ears cocked for the slightest sound. So they're waiting. They're like, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, because they're still scared to come out. What do you think the world's going to be like when they leave?
Not good.
When they come out of the cavern? What do you think?
Messy.
Because the pollution's really, really trashed their world, didn't
They
they?
should really clean up.
They should, but they didn't. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go. And led by the biggest Wump, they crept up to the tunnel, to the cave entrance, to find it covered by a crust of cement. So their grass and their plants and their trees have all been taken away, and now there's roads and cement in its place. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto a freeway. So they're out on the interstate now. There's nobody there, and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to the world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings with walls and walls of windows, looming up on every side in the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. Was the sky there? The sky's there, but it's covered up by all the air pollution, all the smoke and the yucky. And the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, the world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave, when the biggest Wump let out a joyful whoop. Look at their world. Does it look the same?
No.
It does not.
I bet it's brand new to them, like my hamster. What? New cage was new to him. Like
Right.
New cage and
Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wump, wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out onto the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps, so at least they have one meadow, right? In time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump world would never quite be the same. Do you think humans are kind of like the pollutions?
yeah.
Do you think that sometimes people are bad for our world sometimes? Yes. So that's what we're going to be learning this week, is how not to be a pollution, but how to help creatures like the Wumps and what we can do to help our planet. Okay?